Page 1. Om Jnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Dapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitana Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 7, Text number 1. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Maya Sakta Manapartha Yogam Yunjan Madashraya Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yata Yasi Tachinu. Translation. Now hear, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. Text number 2. Jnanam te ham savijnanam idam bhakshyam yasheshatah yajgyatva neha bhuyo nyaj Gyatavyam avishishyate. Translation. I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge both phenomenal and nominal, by knowing which there shall remain nothing further to be known. Text 3. Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam Kaschin Mahaveti Tattvataha. Translation. Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection, and of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. Text 4. Bhumirapo nalo vayu kang mano buddhirevacha ahankara iti yang me Bina prakriti ashtadha. Translation. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these 8 comprise my separated material energies. Text 5. Apareyam itasthanyam prakritim vidhi me param Jiva bhuta mahabaho yayedam dharyate jagat. Translation. Besides this inferior nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, There is a superior energy of mind, which are all living entities who are struggling with material nature and are sustaining the universe. are only stepping stones on the path of Krishna consciousness. One who takes directly to Krishna consciousness automatically knows about Brahmajyoti and Paramatma in full. By practice of Krishna consciousness yoga, one can know everything in full, namely the absolute truth, the living entities, the material nature, and their manifestations with paraphernalia. One should therefore begin yoga practice as directed in the last verse of the 6th chapter. Concentration of the mind upon Krishna, the Supreme, is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 different forms, of which Shravanam is the first and most important. The Lord therefore says to Arjuna, Tat Shrinu, or hear from me. No one can be a greater authority than Krishna, and therefore by hearing from him, one receives the greatest opportunity for progress in Krishna consciousness. One has therefore to learn from Krishna directly or from a pure devotee of Krishna, and not from a non-devotee upstart, puffed up with academic education. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, this process of understanding Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is described in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto as follows. Shrinvatam svakata Krishna punya shravana kirtanaha hridyastasto yabhadrani vidbhunoti suritsatam nashtaprayashvabhadreshu nityang bhagavata sevaya bhagavata yutama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki tadarajastamo bhava kamalobhadayascha ye cheta etar anadvidham stitam satpe prasidati evam pranasa manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha bhagavad tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate vidyate hridaya grantish Chidhyante sarva samshayaha kshiyante chasya karmani drishta evatmanishvare. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best-wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lusts and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of Asamshayam Samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth, Personality of Godhead. Bhagavatam 1.2, 17 through 21. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. So Prabhupada points out in this purport that we must follow the directions which were indicated in chapter 6, text 47. That text states, "And of all yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshiping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all." So the 7th chapter, Prabhupada mentions here that we hear how Krishna manifests different opulences. In the latter part of our recitation, we were hearing that Krishna is represented by different aspects of his creation because of these are some of the most opulent kind of aspects of the material creation. And things like the taste of water, which is the only thing that can quench our thirst, light of the sun and the moon, which are illuminating this dark world, ability in man. Also in this chapter, which is discussed a little bit later, text number 16, Krishna states that there are 4 types of persons who do take to the process of Krishna consciousness, or they approach Krishna for relief of different types of personal desires. And in 15, there are 4 persons outlined which do not surrender unto Krishna, meaning that these 2 classes of persons, one of which is on their way towards becoming the highest type of yogi in Krishna's eyes, and the other is not making progress towards that classification. So Prabhupada mentions that the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita describe that the spirit soul, or the living entity, is a spirit soul. This is very important because without understanding that we are not this body, we cannot make further progress in spiritual life. We have to become convinced of this. And the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, specifically chapter 2, sets that framework. Then there is also mentioned there that there's different types of yogas that we can use to elevate to higher platforms of consciousness. Karma yoga, and we can understand how to progress in different stages. We take knowledge and our meditation can develop. We start working for the Lord and becoming free from the attachment to the fruits of our labors. We learn about the process of making sacrifices or performing yajna. We learn what type of activities are to be done and not to be done. In chapter 6, Sankhya Yoga, we learn principles of regulation and fixing the mind on Krishna, bringing the mind back to the transcendental subject matters, like this. And after that, or after chapter 6, then Prabhupada describes that or at the end of chapter 6, that the meditation or the steady concentration of the mind upon Krishna or Krishna consciousness is the highest form of all the yogas which can elevate the embodied soul. So then Prabhupada mentions that one who is in Krishna consciousness can know Krishna completely. That's stated that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are different realizations of the absolute truth, including Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And when you're in Krishna consciousness, your meditation is on Bhagavan feature of the absolute. And when you are fixed on this Bhagavan feature of the absolute truth, then everything else is included. You understand that Krishna is incarnating or expanding himself into unlimited incarnations, including the Purusha avatars, of which the Paramatma or Kshirodakashayi Vishnu is one of them. These are the Purusha avatars or Purusha incarnations are the Vishnu incarnations of Krishna that maintain this material manifestation and are making arrangements for the gradual reclamation of all conditioned souls back to the spiritual world. So the Paramatma is one of Krishna's incarnations, that's understood. And this Brahman effulgence or this Brahmajyoti is the rays of Krishna's transcendental body. So all these things are revealed automatically to the person who has taken up directly fixing the mind upon Krishna, the personal feature of the absolute truth. And all the other different types of yogas, they're just stepping stones. And this is the amazing opulence or great fortune of those who come in contact with this movement, that we have the ability to take the lift to the highest floor of the yoga ladder, instead of going step by step through the arduous and precarious process, a step-by-step process, we can immediately take to Krishna consciousness pretty much as soon as we meet the devotees. They give us Krishna prasadam, which we taste, and they give us Krishna's holy name, which we chant. They give us Krishna's transcendental form, which we behold. They give us the incense, which we smell, and the knowledge of Krishna, which we hear. So these are all directly elevating us to the topmost platform. And if we just understand that simply by chanting, glorifying the Lord in his personal feature, hearing and chanting about the Lord in his personal feature, we can become, or we can reach all perfection. That is firm faith. That is strong faith. That constitutes what's required to stay on the way to perfection. And That's recommended by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we should take this up. Prabhupada mentions that we should hear from Krishna, and hearing from Krishna or his devotees is the same. It's stated in the prayers from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that the spiritual master is to be respected as good as the Lord. Sakshad dharit vina samasta shastraya, like that. That he is sakshat dharit vina, Hari, right? So this word Hari means Krishna, and he is as good as Krishna because, and that's the statement of the Shastra or the scripture. So this is important for us that we understand that the Lord has the potency to approach us and to instruct us through his bona fide representative. And it's stated that the spiritual master is the external manifestation of the super soul. So the Lord is residing within the heart and is guiding the wanderings of all living entities, and is seated like a bird upon the tree of the body, and we are another bird within the body. And the super soul is the Lord within the heart, is trying to give us good counsel and lead us back to himself. And the spiritual master is the external manifestation of the super soul, because that spiritual master has become completely harmonized, or has made his will one with the will of the Lord. So the Lord within the heart is that same Lord within my heart, is there within his heart as well. And because the spiritual master has harmonized himself with the Lord, has purified his desires to desire only in accord with the Lord's desire, then the Lord uses him as a completely transparent via medium to communicate with the sincere disciple how to make further advancement in devotional service. So it's stated that the spiritual master is called Shrotriyam Brahmanishtam, which means that this person has heard himself from authorities. Shrotriyam Brahmanishtam, and is fixed in spirit, or is fixed in Krishna consciousness. So this is important because the devotee of Krishna is not an upstart, right? Or hearing from Krishna, or hearing about Krishna from somebody who's not a devotee or is an upstart, is not constitute hearing from Krishna himself. But hearing from a humble, sincere devotee who is himself heard submissively from a bona fide devotee of Krishna, such a person, or hearing from such a person, is as good as hearing from Krishna. So this is very important for us, because we heard described in the next part of the purport that when we hear about Krishna, the Lord from within the heart, he purifies the devotee who's constantly engaging in hearing about him. And the transcendental knowledge, which is dormant within each one of us, becomes awakened and or developed naturally. And then we hear more and more, then we become fixed in devotional service. I'm just reading this. And when we become fixed in devotional service, then we become free from the lower modes. Right? And then things like lust and avarice are done away with. And when these things are gone, when these impurities have been wiped away, then we remain steady in pure goodness. And we become enlivened by devotional service. So now we're experiencing pleasure, or we are being energized by serving Krishna. At first, it's like we're taking bitter medicine. That's discussed in the Nectar of Instruction. But after lust and avarice are wiped away, then we become enlivened by serving Krishna. Then, right, then it's stated that we understand the science of God perfectly. It means there's no more doubts, no more confusion. So that's exactly what Krishna is saying here, that now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. So then this bhakti yoga, in this way, this bhakti yoga process, fixing the mind upon Krishna, hearing of him, chanting his glories, serving him as described in the scriptures and under the guidance of the spiritual master, becoming clean from all dirtiness. In this way, material knot, which is in the heart, is severed. Like a knot is so tight, you can't really untie it. But if you cut it, right, then the whole thing is kind of like, it just kind of, you can just start ripping it apart, So this is the process of Krishna consciousness. It is a sharp sword with which to cut our material entanglements, and for good. And we can come to the stage of asamshayam samagram, understanding the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead. So real religion means to know God and to serve him, or to know God and to love him, right? Service or obedience is the beginnings of love. So when we follow the practice, whether we're doing so very with a great relish, or we're doing so with a little begrudging attitude, or it's a little bitter, either way, right? That little obedience or that little service, that is love. and it's just in its preliminary stages or phases, and it will develop if we continue with the process as described here. Okay, thank you so much, devotees. Are there some comments or some questions that we can churn? Krishnendu Prabhu, then Rishi Prabhu, then Jagannath Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. You mentioned this knot in the heart, and clearly it seems like it's there and it's no good, but when it starts being cut, I don't like it so much. Why is this? It's difficult, is what I mean to say. Seems like it's something that's binding us and creating problems, but then, we try to untie it and unsort it. And that's one thing, but then when it starts getting cut, it's like, oh, don't do that. Let me do my own thing. Maybe you could speak a few words on that.
There's an example, which is that those who are vimudhas are very, foolish persons. They're compared to a camel who enjoys to eat thorns, which are very pointy. So he likes to eat the thorns because when he eats them, he will bleed. And he likes the flavor of that blood, of his own blood. But he thinks that it's the thorns. So he keeps eating them. So when we're in the when we're dominated by the modes of passion and ignorance, basically we can't see clearly. We don't know what is to be done or not to be done. And we like, or we are attracted to things which are actually bad for our real self-interest. So it's just a matter of ignorance. But because we're ignorant, then we do things which we think are good for us, because everybody must act for his own self-interest. Like, it's not logical for any person to act contrary to his self-interest. But depending on our consciousness or depending on our knowledge, we have a supposed self-interest, or we have what we think is our self-interest based on our knowledge. So no matter who it is, we're all working for our own pleasure. We're pleasure seeking. Anandamaya Vyasat. The Lord is pleasure seeking, so we are also. And depending on how much knowledge we have acquired or the state of our consciousness, we seek for pleasure more or less based on the modes that we have associated with. That's stated in the 13th chapter, text number 22. Purusha prakriti stohi bhunkte prakriti jan gunan sagunan samatityaitan. No, mixed it up. Purusha prakriti stohi bhunkte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangosya sarasad yoni janmasu. Karanam guna sangha, right? Due to his association with that material nature, he's born into different species of life and experiences good and bad. So, depending on our association, we have an affinity towards certain types of pleasures But we only enjoy such pleasures due to mental concoction, because we think that we are something that we are not. When we have to give up raw or visceral sense gratification according to the modes of ignorance or passion, we've been associating with those modes so much, so we really like that type of pleasure. We really like, or we really think that that type of sense contact is pleasure, right? Based on my association with the mode ignorance, I really think that it's pleasurable to take intoxication. But it's only because that's the state of my mind. That's my concoction there. So to answer the question, when the knot starts to be cut, actually, that's actually very joyful. What I think is the uncertainty is actually that the displeasure is experienced by us practitioners of Bhakti Yoga because we actually are attached to those pleasures, and we don't want to actually cut the knot. So depending on our surrender, the knot is actually cut, and we experience suffering because we don't want to cut the knot. But if we would cut it, or if we would let Krishna cut it with this process, then we would be completely relieved and totally peaceful and happy. The process of Krishna consciousness is bitter at first because we have a disease condition. We think we're this body, and we think we have a certain mental state and things like that. And we are envious of Krishna, which was discussed recently. So we want to be the center. So we don't like to glorify Krishna or serve him because we want people to serve us and glorify us. But I think more than not, we are not ready for Krishna to cut the knot. And we think that we'll be less happy to do it. So we actually hold back from taking this process very much wholeheartedly, or depending on this process. It's like a life vest or like a life preserver. Depend upon it as if this is all that I have. Rather, we're drowning, and we're afraid that if we grab the life vest, we'll be less pleasurable. So we're drowning. We were drowning before too. And that's always unpleasurable. It wasn't quite exactly, but is that something? That's something I've been thinking about though. Like, until we are become pure devotees of Krishna, right? Ahaituki apratiyata. I think yatma suprasidati, or how do we say it? Yatma suprasidati. That we'll experience the full satisfaction when we are executing unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service. So we must suffer until that point, or we will be in distress until that point. So really our only distress is because we don't want Krishna to cut it. And we're perceiving that if I actually surrender or depend upon Krishna, I'll lose my pleasure. But it's like trading biting thorns or, for, the best foodstuffs. But we're just afraid to take the leap, and go for the process. So in one sense, I think that Krishna, because he sees that we started, he's giving us always more encouragements. So we may feel like, man, my life is totally worse now that I've started trying to chant and stuff like that, But it was really bad before. And it was going to get worse too. But by the mercy of the devotees, they gave us the process. And now Krishna's just edging us right along, just as we need to take the process more and more seriously. Is that okay, Prabhu? Okay. So I took the time. Let us go. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the